In the vast expanse of the galaxy where advanced alien civilizations wielded energy weapons that could slice through starship hulls and plasma rifles that turned enemies to ash in milliseconds, one thing remained constant across every species: their complete dismissal of primitive projectile weapons. The Zephyrians with their crystalline technology, the Vorthak with their bioengineered living weapons, and the mechanical Nexari with their quantum disruptors all shared the same arrogant assumption.
They believed that any species still using ancient kinetic weapons was too primitive to pose a real threat in modern warfare. They had never encountered humanity.
And they had certainly never faced Sergeant Elena Vasquez, whose great-grandfather's hunting rifle had been modified with technology that would make their advanced targeting systems weep with envy. What they dismissed as a crude metal tube was about to teach them why humans had spent millennia perfecting the art of putting holes in things from very far away.
The aliens were about to learn that sometimes the old ways are the best ways, and sometimes underestimating your enemy because of their primitive technology is the last mistake you'll ever make. The crimson sun of Kepler, 442b, cast long shadows across the rocky outcrops, where Sergeant Elena Vasquez lay motionless, her breathing controlled and steady.
300 meters below her position, the Zephyrian forward operating base buzzed with activity that would have been invisible to most human eyes. But Elena wasn't most humans. She was a third-generation military sniper, trained by her father who had been trained by his father, carrying forward a tradition that stretched back to the battlefields of Earth's bloodiest conflicts. Through her scope she watched the crystalline beings move with their characteristic fluid grace. The Zephyrians stood nearly 8 feet tall, their translucent bodies refracting light in patterns that served as their primary form of communication. Their weapons were works of art and destruction combined, elegant curves of living crystal that could channel stellar energy into devastating beams capable of melting through titanium like butter. Elena's weapon, by comparison, looked like something pulled from a museum. The base structure was her great-grandfather's Winchester Model 70, a hunting rifle that had taken deer in the forests of Montana over a century ago.
But appearances could be deceiving. The stock had been reinforced with graphene composites, the barrel replaced with a magnetically stabilized tube capable of accelerating projectiles to hypersonic velocities, and the scope upgraded with quantum targeting systems that could track a target's movement patterns and predict their position 3 seconds into the future.
Still, to any observer, especially an alien one, it looked primitive. The Zephyrian commander, designated as Target Alpha through Elena's tactical network, gestured with appendages that sparkled like cut diamonds.
Elena couldn't understand their light language, but she didn't need to. Intelligence had already briefed her on what was happening here.
The Zephyrians were preparing to move their heavy assault units through the canyon below, planning to flank the main human defensive position 15 kilometers to the east. If they succeeded, over 3,000 human colonists would be caught in a crossfire with nowhere to run.
Elena's mission was simple in concept, nearly impossible in execution. Eliminate the Zephyrian command structure before they could coordinate the flanking maneuver.
She had been chosen not because she was the best shot in the colonial Marines, though she was, but because she was the only sniper willing to work alone, deep in enemy territory, with equipment that every military advisor had called tactically insufficient for the threat level. Her radio crackled softly.
Raven 1? This is Command. What's your status? Elena touched her throat mic. In position. Command. Enemy count confirmed at 47 combatants. Command structure appears to be 3 primary targets and 5 secondary. Copy that, Raven 1. Be advised, we're tracking Zephyrian reinforcements moving toward your position.
Estimated arrival in 90 minutes. 90 minutes to take out 8 high-value targets surrounded by nearly 50 guards, all while avoiding detection by sensors that could pick up the heat signature of a mouse at 2 kilometers. Elena had faced worse odds, but not by much. She adjusted her position slightly, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder. The weapon had been modified extensively, but it still retained the solid, dependable feel that had made it famous on Earth. While other snipers in the colonial forces carried energy weapons or magnetic acceleration rifles, Elena had insisted on keeping kinetic projectiles. Her reasoning was simple. Energy weapons left signatures that could be tracked and traced. Magnetic rifles required power sources that generated electromagnetic fields. But a chemically propelled projectile fired from a properly maintained rifle was nearly undetectable until the moment it arrived on target. The Zephyrians had sophisticated detection equipment, but it was designed to identify the energy signatures of modern weapons. They weren't looking for the specific heat and chemical signatures of gunpowder combustion, simply because they couldn't conceive of any military force still using such primitive technology.
Elena began her target assessment. The primary command target, Alpha, stood near the center of the formation, his crystalline body pulsing with authority signals that made him stand out like a beacon to anyone who knew how to read Zephyrian social structures.
2 other command figures flanked him, their positions indicating they were likely the tactical and logistics coordinators for the operation. The wind was calm, but Elena still made minute adjustments to her calculations. At this distance, even the slightest atmospheric disturbance could send her shot wide. She had one chance to begin this engagement properly. If she missed her first target, or if the shot wasn't immediately lethal, the entire Zephyrian force would go to full alert and her mission would become exponentially more difficult. She settled the crosshairs on Alpha Center Mass, where intelligence indicated the Zephyrian primary nervous cluster was located. The targeting computer in her scope calculated distance, wind speed, target movement patterns, and even the gravitational differences between this planet and Earth. Numbers scrolled across her display: range 847 meters, wind negligible, target prediction confidence 94.7%. Elena took a slow breath, let half of it out, and held. Her finger moved to the trigger, applying the steady pressure that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of practice.
In this moment, she was connected to her weapon in a way that no energy rifle or plasma cannon could match. This was human craftsmanship, human ingenuity, and human stubbornness, refusing to bow to alien technological superiority.
The rifle fired with a sound that was barely a whisper, the report suppressed by advanced baffling systems that dispersed the acoustic signature across multiple frequency ranges. The projectile, a tungsten core round traveling at over 3 times the speed of sound, crossed the distance to the target in less than a second. Alpha's crystalline body exploded in a shower of rainbow fragments as the round passed through his nervous center and continued into the ground behind him. The other Zephyrians froze for a moment, their light communication systems flashing in what Elena recognized as confusion and alarm patterns. Before they could fully process what had happened, Elena was already tracking her second target.
The logistics coordinator had moved slightly to the left, but her targeting system had predicted this movement. The second shot followed 4 seconds after the first, and another command figure dissolved into sparkling debris.
Now the Zephyrians were reacting with military precision. Energy shields snapped into existence around the remaining commanders, and soldiers began scanning the surrounding terrain with weapons ready.
But they were looking for energy signatures, electromagnetic disturbances, heat blooms from power sources. They weren't looking for one human with a rifle that their technology couldn't properly identify.
Elena's third shot took down the tactical coordinator just as his protective shield activated. The tungsten round punched through the energy barrier as if it weren't there, because energy shields were designed to stop energy weapons, not solid projectiles moving at hypersonic velocities.
With 3 shots, Elena had eliminated the entire command structure of the Zephyrian flanking force. But now came the hard part.
The remaining 44 soldiers were no longer confused. They were angry, and they were spreading out to search for her position. Through her scope, Elena watched as the Zephyrians deployed in perfect textbook formations, their movements coordinated despite the loss of their commanders. These were professional soldiers, and they knew how to adapt.
Their weapons began charging, sending telltale energy readings across the electromagnetic spectrum. As they prepared to systematically sterilize every possible sniper position in the surrounding hills, Elena smiled grimly.
Let them come. She had grown up hunting in mountains not unlike these, tracking prey that could smell her from a mile away and hear her heartbeat from 200 meters.
Zephyrians might have superior technology, but they had never learned to hunt the way humans had been hunting for tens of thousands of years. She began to move, staying low and using the natural contours of the landscape to mask her thermal signature.
Her rifle, broken down into 3 easily carried components, would be reassembled at her next firing position in less than 90 seconds. The Zephyrians were about to learn why human military doctrine placed such emphasis on individual initiative and adaptability.
As she moved through the rocks, Elena's radio crackled again. Raven 1 were reading massive energy signatures from your area.
What's your status? Command. Primary targets eliminated. Beginning harassment of secondary targets.
Enemy is actively searching for my position. Do you need extraction, Raven 1? Elena paused at her next position and began reassembling her rifle.
Below, the Zephyrians were moving in her general direction, but they were still searching a pattern designed to locate electronic signatures and energy sources. They had no idea they were hunting someone who had learned to become invisible, using techniques that predated their entire civilization. Negative command. These crystal boys are about to get a lesson in human stubbornness. Raven 1 out. She settled into her new position and began acquiring her next target. The lesson was just beginning. Elena moved through the rocky terrain like a ghost. her movements calculated and deliberate.
Each step was placed with the precision of someone who had learned to walk silently on everything from crisp autumn leaves to loose gravel. The Zephyrians below were spreading out in search patterns, their crystalline bodies refracting the alien sun's light in ways that would have been beautiful under different circumstances.
But Elena wasn't here for sightseeing. She was here to prove that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. Her new position offered a perfect view of the Zephyrian search operation. They had divided into 4 teams of 11 soldiers each, with the remaining 4 forming what appeared to be a central coordination unit.
Their movements were textbook perfect, the kind of tactical deployment that would have impressed any human military instructor. But they were making one critical mistake. They were searching for an enemy who fought like they did.
Zephyrian military doctrine, according to the intelligence briefings Elena had memorized, emphasized technological superiority and coordinated energy weapons fire. Their soldiers were trained to identify enemy positions through electronic signatures, heat blooms from power sources, and electromagnetic disturbances from weapons charging cycles.
They excelled at fighting other high-tech military forces who relied on similar equipment and tactics. They had no experience hunting an enemy who had learned warfare from ancestors who tracked prey through ancient forests with nothing but patience, cunning, and weapons that worked without generating any electronic signature whatsoever. Elena settled into her new firing position, a natural depression in the rocks that provided excellent concealment while offering multiple escape routes. She reassembled her rifle with practiced efficiency, each component fitting together with the satisfying precision of superior craftsmanship. Within 2 minutes of reaching the position, she was ready to continue her deadly work. Through her scope, she identified her next priority target. The central coordination unit included what appeared to be a senior sergeant equivalent, identifiable by the specific light patterns flowing through his crystalline structure. In human military terms, he would be the field leader responsible for coordinating the search teams and maintaining communication with higher command.
The targeting computer calculated the shot parameters, range 734 meters.
Slight crosswind from the northeast at 3.2 meters per second. Target movement pattern: stationary but alert, likely to move within the next 15 seconds based on observed behavior patterns. Elena controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate slow as she entered the focused state that separated professional snipers from amateur shooters. This was a form of meditation that her grandfather had taught her father, and her father had taught her.
In this state, the rifle became an extension of her body, the target simply a point in space that needed to be reached by her bullet, and everything else faded into background noise. The shot broke clean, the rifle's recoil absorbed by Elena's body position, and the weapon's advanced recoil compensation system. 800 meters away, the Zephyrian field coordinator simply ceased to exist. His crystalline form shattered by a tungsten round that arrived faster than the sound of the shot that fired it. The reaction was immediate and predictable.
The 4 search teams converged on the area where they calculated the shot must have originated, their energy weapons charging in preparation for a coordinated barrage that would sterilize every possible firing position in a 200-meter radius. But Elena was already gone.
She moved through a route she had planned during her initial reconnaissance, staying in the shadows of larger rock formations and using natural defilade to mask her movement from the Zephyrian sensors. Her next position was 600 meters to the west, requiring a challenging climb up a steep slope that would have been impossible for the Zephyrian's crystalline physiology, but was merely difficult for a human who had grown up rock climbing in the mountains of Colorado. The Zephyrians' response was textbook perfect and completely wrong for the situation. They saturated Elena's former position with enough energy to melt solid rock, turning the entire area into a glowing crater of superheated stone. Then they waited, scanning with their sensors for any indication that they had eliminated their target. Elena used their momentary pause to acquire her next target from her new position. One of the search team leaders had positioned himself on a small ridge, apparently trying to coordinate his team's movement while maintaining visual contact with the other units. His elevated position made him an excellent target, but it also meant that his elimination would be immediately visible to every other Zephyrian in the area.
Sometimes psychological warfare was more important than tactical concealment.
Elena's third shot of the engagement sent the search team leader tumbling from his ridge in a shower of crystal fragments. The psychological effect on the remaining Zephyrians was immediate and profound. Their light communication systems began flashing in patterns that Elena's tactical database identified as expressions of fear, confusion, and anger.
They were beginning to realize that they were facing an enemy who didn't follow the rules of modern warfare. The Zephyrian response to this third kill was different.
Instead of converging on Elena's calculated position, they began a more systematic search pattern, moving in coordinated sweeps designed to flush out a hidden enemy regardless of their technology level. It was a smart adaptation, but it also spread them thinner and made individual targets more accessible.
Elena moved again, this time to a position that had been prepared hours earlier during her initial infiltration. She had constructed a hide using local materials and human camouflage techniques that would be invisible to Zephyrian sensors because they didn't generate any electronic signature and perfectly mimicked the natural background environment.
From this concealed position, she could observe the entire Zephyrian search operation while remaining effectively invisible. The aliens were moving more cautiously now, their formations tighter and their movements more careful.
They had lost 4 soldiers, including their entire command structure, and they still had no idea where their enemy was located or what kind of weapon was being used against them. Alina's tactical radio crackled softly.
Raven 1 command. We're monitoring Zephyrian communications. They're requesting immediate reinforcement and air support. Estimated arrival time 45 minutes.
Copy, command. How many reinforcements? At least 2 full companies, Raven 1.
Possibly more. They're also bringing atmospheric interdiction platforms.
Elena processed this information while tracking the movement of another high-value target through her scope. Atmospheric interdiction platforms were essentially flying weapons platforms capable of sterilizing large areas from altitude.
Once they arrived, her mission would become significantly more complicated. 45 minutes to eliminate as many Zephyrian soldiers as possible before the situation became untenable.
Elena had faced worse odds, but usually with more ammunition and better extraction options. She settled her crosshairs on a Zephyrian soldier who appeared to be operating some kind of communications equipment. Taking out their ability to coordinate with incoming reinforcements might buy her additional time and increase the confusion among the remaining forces. The 4th shot broke clean, and another Zephyrian dissolved into crystalline fragments.
This time, however, Elena noticed something different in the alien's reaction. Instead of the chaotic light flashing she had observed before, the remaining soldiers began communicating in short, controlled bursts.
They were adapting to the situation, developing new tactics specifically designed to counter an invisible sniper. Elena smiled grimly. Good. She had always preferred fighting intelligent enemies. It made victory more meaningful. She began planning her next movement, calculating routes and firing positions that would allow her to continue the engagement while preparing for eventual extraction.
The Zephyrians were learning, but Elena had been born to a family that had been perfecting these techniques for generations. They had 45 minutes to find her before their reinforcements arrived.
Elena intended to make every minute count. The alien soldiers below continued their search, their movements now betraying a nervous energy that hadn't been present before.
They were beginning to understand that they were facing something outside their experience, an enemy who operated by rules they didn't understand and couldn't predict. Elena moved to her next position, already selecting her 5th target.
The lesson in human warfare was far from over, and she intended to make it memorable. By the time those reinforcements arrived, the surviving Zephyrians would have a very different perspective on the effectiveness of primitive human weapons.
The hunt was just getting started. The Zephyrian survivors had reorganized into a defensive perimeter, their crystalline forms creating a glittering circle of nervous energy in the valley below.
Elena counted 39 remaining soldiers, all now acutely aware that death could arrive from any direction without warning. Their previous confident advance had transformed into a cautious huddle, with soldiers constantly scanning the surrounding terrain while maintaining overlapping fields of fire. From her new position, Elena could observe their adaptation process in real time. The Zephyrians were smart. She had to give them credit for that. They had abandoned their original search and destroy tactics in favor of a defensive strategy designed to minimize casualties while waiting for reinforcements. It was a reasonable response to an unreasonable situation. Unfortunately for them, Elena had no intention of allowing them to simply wait it out. She had moved to a position on the opposite side of the valley, requiring a careful climb through loose scree that would have been impossible to accomplish without alerting the Zephyrians to her movement if they had been using acoustic sensors. But their technology was focused on electronic and energy signatures, leaving them effectively deaf to the subtle sounds of careful human movement. Through her scope, Elena studied the defensive formation. The Zephyrians had positioned themselves to provide maximum mutual support, with clear lines of sight between positions and coordinated sensor coverage that would detect any traditional military approach. Their positions were well chosen, professionally executed, and completely useless against an enemy they couldn't detect.
Elena's tactical database identified several high-value targets within the formation. A communications specialist maintaining contact with the incoming reinforcements.
A weapons coordinator managing the defensive fire patterns. A field medic tending to soldiers suffering from what appeared to be psychological stress reactions to their losses.
She selected the communications specialist as her next target.
Disrupting their ability to coordinate with reinforcements would increase confusion and possibly delay the arrival of additional forces. The specialist was positioned near the center of the formation, partially concealed behind a crystalline energy barrier that would stop most weapons but was transparent to her scope's targeting system. Range: 892 meters. Wind conditions: stable. Target movement: minimal. Focused on equipment operation. Elena controlled her breathing and settled into the familiar rhythm of precision shooting. This was the 5th shot of the engagement, and she could feel the steady accumulation of stress that came with extended sniper operations.
Each shot increased the enemy's alertness and determination to locate her position. Each shot made the next shot more difficult and more dangerous.
But Elena had been trained for this. Her father had taught her that sniping wasn't just about marksmanship, it was about mental endurance. The ability to maintain perfect precision while under increasing pressure was what separated professional military snipers from sports shooters and hunters. The shot broke clean. The communications specialist's crystalline form exploded in a shower of rainbow fragments, along with the communications equipment he had been operating. The psychological effect on the surrounding Zephyrians was immediate and devastating. Several soldiers began flashing distress patterns so rapidly that their bodies appeared to strobe like emergency beacons. Elena was already moving before the sound of her shot reached the Zephyrian position. She had learned long ago that mobility was just as important as accuracy when operating alone behind enemy lines.
Stay still too long, and even the most advanced camouflage would eventually be detected by determined enemies with superior technology. Her next position required crossing an exposed section of terrain that would be visible from the Zephyrian defensive perimeter.
Elena had identified this route during her initial reconnaissance and prepared for it by creating multiple false positions that would confuse enemy targeting if they managed to detect her movement. She moved in short rushes, using natural cover and staying low to minimize her profile. The Zephyrians were scanning constantly now, their weapons trained on every possible firing position they could identify. But they were looking for enemies who moved like they did, in coordinated units with electronic support and energy signatures. Elena reached her next position without being detected, settling into a carefully prepared hide that offered excellent concealment and multiple escape routes. From here, she could observe the entire Zephyrian formation while remaining invisible to their sensors.
The aliens' behavior had changed dramatically since the loss of their communications specialist. Without contact with their reinforcements, they were operating in tactical isolation. Their formation was becoming more compact, more defensive, but also more vulnerable to the kind of psychological pressure Elena specialized in applying. She selected her next target, the field medic. In human military doctrine, medics were protected non-combatants, but Elena had studied Zephyrian military structure extensively. Their medics were also psychological warfare specialists, trained to maintain unit morale and combat effectiveness under stress. Eliminating the medic would remove their primary defense against the kind of terror she was systematically applying. The shot parameters were challenging. The medic was positioned behind partial cover, moving between wounded soldiers, and surrounded by protective overwatch. Elena would have to time her shot perfectly to achieve a clean kill without risking a miss that would reveal her position. She watched the medic's movement pattern through 3 complete cycles, noting the precise timing of his stops at each wounded soldier's position. The targeting computer calculated the optimal intercept point, a position where the medic would be exposed for exactly 1.7 seconds while tending to a soldier suffering from obvious stress reactions. Elena synchronized her breathing with the medic's movement pattern, waiting for the perfect moment. When it came, she was ready. The 6th shot of the engagement sent the Zephyrian medic into crystalline oblivion just as he was attempting to calm a panicking soldier. The psychological effect was immediate and catastrophic. Without their medic, the wounded and stressed Zephyrians began displaying increasingly erratic behavior. Their formation began to collapse as soldiers abandoned their positions, to cluster together for mutual psychological support. Elena's radio crackled. Raven 1, we're reading massive electromagnetic signatures approaching your position.
Zephyrian reinforcements are 20 minutes out, and they're bringing heavy atmospheric interdiction platforms. Copy, Command.
What's the extraction plan? Raven 1, we cannot risk aircraft in that airspace once the interdiction platforms arrive. You need to reach extraction point Charlie within 15 minutes, or you'll be on your own until we can neutralize their air support.
Elena calculated the distance to extraction point Charlie while tracking another potential target through her scope. 15 minutes to cover 4 kilometers of rough terrain while avoiding detection by 33 increasingly paranoid alien soldiers.
Under normal circumstances, it would be challenging but achievable. These weren't normal circumstances. Elena made a decision that would have horrified her instructors but made perfect sense in the current tactical situation. Instead of beginning her movement toward the extraction point, she settled deeper into her firing position and began acquiring her next target.
Command, negative on immediate extraction.
I still have work to do here. Raven 1, that's not advisable. Once those interdiction platforms arrive, command, these crystal boys think they understand human warfare now. I'm going to give them a few more lessons before I leave. Trust me on this one.
Elena selected her seventh target, a soldier who appeared to be attempting to restore some kind of order to the increasingly chaotic formation. Leadership was emerging from the ranks, and Elena intended to eliminate it before it could take root.
Through her scope, she watched the Zephyrian soldier moving between positions, trying to restore the defensive perimeter that was collapsing under psychological pressure. He was brave. She had to admit that.
Stepping up to lead when the existing leadership had been systematically eliminated took courage, regardless of species, but courage wouldn't save him from a tungsten round traveling at 3 times the speed of sound.
The 7th shot eliminated the emerging leader just as he was beginning to restore order to his unit. The remaining Zephyrians' formation completely collapsed, with soldiers abandoning their positions to cluster in tight groups that made them easier targets, but provided psychological comfort.
Elena smiled grimly as she prepared to move to her final firing position. The approaching reinforcements would find a very different situation than they were expecting.
Instead of a confident forward operating base preparing to execute a flanking maneuver, they would find the survivors of a systematic psychological warfare campaign that had shattered their unit cohesion and tactical effectiveness. The lesson was almost complete.
But Elena had one more point to make before she began her withdrawal. She wanted to make sure the approaching Zephyrian reinforcements understood exactly what they were dealing with.
The old ways were sometimes the best ways, and humans had been perfecting the art of warfare for a very long time. The approaching Zephyrian reinforcements announced their arrival with a display of technological superiority that would have been intimidating under different circumstances.
3 atmospheric interdiction platforms descended from the crimson sky like metallic angels of death, their hulls bristling with energy weapons capable of sterilizing square kilometers of terrain. Behind them came 2 full companies of fresh troops, their crystalline forms glittering with confidence and advanced weaponry.
Elena watched their approach through her scope from a position she had prepared specifically for this moment. While the surviving members of the original Zephyrian force huddled in their collapsed formation below, she had moved to an elevated position that offered perfect overwatch of the entire valley. The position was exposed and would be easily detectable once the reinforcements began serious scanning operations. But that was exactly what Elena wanted. Sometimes the best way to teach a lesson was to let the students see the teacher clearly.
The lead interdiction platform settled into a hovering position above the survivors, its sensors immediately beginning intensive scans of the surrounding terrain.
Elena could practically feel the electronic fingers probing the landscape, searching for heat signatures, electromagnetic emissions, and energy weapon residue that would reveal her position. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find.
Elena's rifle generated no electromagnetic signature, produced minimal heat, and left no energy residue. To the Zephyrian sensors, she might as well have been a natural rock formation.
The fresh troops began deploying in textbook formations, their movements coordinated and professional. Elena counted 48 soldiers in the first wave, with more transport platforms approaching in the distance. The Zephyrian response to her harassment of their forward operating base was overwhelming by any reasonable military standard, which was exactly the point Elena intended to make. Through her scope, she identified the reinforcement commander, easily recognizable by the authority patterns flowing through his crystalline structure and his position in the formation. He was currently coordinating with the interdiction platform commanders, probably receiving briefings on the situation from the survivors of Elena's previous engagement. Elena imagined that conversation. 47 soldiers reduced to 32 by an invisible enemy, using an undetectable weapon. No energy signatures, no electromagnetic disturbances, no pattern that fit any known military doctrine in their databases. An enemy who could eliminate their soldiers at will, while remaining completely hidden from their most advanced sensors. The commander's light patterns suggested confusion and concern, emotions that would soon be replaced by something much more primal. Elena settled her crosshairs on the commander's center mass and began her final calculations. This shot was different from the previous 7. This wasn't about tactical advantage or psychological warfare. This was about sending a message that would be understood across the galaxy. Range: 1,247 meters. Atmospheric conditions: stable. Target movement: minimal. This was the longest shot Elena had ever attempted in combat conditions, at the very edge of her weapon's effective range. But the message required precision and drama in equal measure. The shot needed to be perfect, not just tactically successful but psychologically devastating. Elena controlled her breathing and entered the deep focus state that had been passed down through 3 generations of her family. In this moment, she was connected to every human sniper who had ever taken a difficult shot in defense of their people. From the forests of Finland to the mountains of Afghanistan, from the beaches of Normandy to the valleys of Vietnam, the spirit of human determination and precision flowed through her.
The shot broke clean, 1,247 meters away. The Zephyrian commander ceased to exist in a shower of rainbow fragments that caught the alien sun's light like scattered diamonds.
The psychological effect on the fresh troops was immediate and catastrophic. Soldiers who had been moving with confidence and purpose suddenly found themselves leaderless, facing an enemy they couldn't detect or understand.
But Elena wasn't finished. The interdiction platforms responded to their commander's death by beginning systematic bombardment of every possible sniper position they could identify. Energy beams capable of melting stone began sterilizing the landscape in expanding circles, searching for an enemy who had already moved to her next position. Elena had anticipated this response and prepared accordingly.
Her next firing position was located in a natural cave system that would protect her from the orbital bombardment while offering a clear line of sight to the valley floor.
The position had another advantage. It would be the last place the Zephyrians would expect to find a sniper, because it appeared to offer no escape route. From this position, Elena could observe the chaos spreading through the Zephyrian forces.
Without their commander, the fresh troops were attempting to maintain formation while dealing with the psychological pressure of knowing their leader had been eliminated by an invisible enemy. The survivors of the original force were displaying increasing signs of stress, their light communication patterns becoming erratic and panicked.
Elena's tactical radio crackled. Raven 1, we're reading massive energy discharges from your position.
What's your status? Command, I just eliminated their reinforcement commander. They're currently sterilizing half the landscape trying to find me.
Raven 1, you need to begin extraction immediately. We're detecting additional Zephyrian forces approaching your position.
How many, Command? At least a full battalion. Raven 1. This is becoming a major engagement.
Elena processed this information while tracking another target through her scope. A full battalion meant over 500 additional troops plus supporting elements and additional interdiction platforms.
The Zephyrians were escalating their response far beyond what would be reasonable for dealing with a single sniper, which meant they were beginning to understand the true lesson she was teaching. Command, what's the status of our main defensive positions? All secure. Raven 1. The Zephyrian flanking maneuver was completely disrupted when their forward element failed to report in.
Elena smiled. The original mission had been accomplished before she fired her first shot.
Everything since then had been extra credit, a demonstration of human military philosophy that the Zephyrians would remember for generations. She selected her 9th target of the engagement, a Zephyrian soldier who was attempting to coordinate defensive positions while the interdiction platforms continued their bombardment. The soldier was displaying remarkable courage under impossible circumstances, trying to restore order to a situation that had moved far beyond normal tactical responses. Elena respected courage, but respect wouldn't prevent her from eliminating threats to human colonists. The 9th shot sent another Zephyrian into crystalline oblivion, further fragmenting the unity of the surviving forces.
The interdiction platforms responded by increasing the intensity of their bombardment, turning entire sections of the landscape into glowing craters of melted stone. Elena moved deeper into the cave system following routes she had mapped during her initial reconnaissance. The caves offered protection from the orbital bombardment while providing multiple firing positions that would allow her to continue engaging targets. More importantly, they offered something the Zephyrians weren't prepared for, a network of natural tunnels that would allow her to disappear completely when the time came.
Her radio crackled again. Raven 1, Zephyrian battalion strength reinforcements will arrive in 20 minutes.
Recommend immediate extraction to avoid being trapped. Elena settled into a new firing position that offered a perfect view of the valley floor, where the surviving Zephyrians were attempting to establish a defensive perimeter despite the chaos and confusion.
They were learning, adapting, trying to apply conventional military doctrine to an unconventional threat. Command negative on extraction.
I've got at least 10 more lessons to teach before I'm done here. Elena had made her decision.
The approaching battalion represented an opportunity to deliver a lesson that would resonate throughout Zephyrian military doctrine for decades to come.
One human, with one rifle, holding off an entire battalion of technologically superior alien forces. It was the kind of story that would become legend among both human and alien military forces. Through her scope, she watched the interdiction platforms adjusting their bombardment patterns, trying to systematically eliminate every possible hiding place in the surrounding terrain. Their approach was logical, methodical, and completely wrong for the situation. They were fighting an enemy who didn't follow their rules, using tactics they didn't understand, with weapons their technology couldn't properly detect. Elena selected her 10th target,
an interdiction platform commander visible through the transparent sections of his vehicle's hull. Taking out an airborne target would require precision shooting at its most demanding, but the psychological effect would be worth the risk. She calculated the shot parameters carefully. The platform was hovering at approximately 800 meters distance and 100 meters altitude, moving in slow circles as it coordinated the bombardment pattern. The target would be visible for approximately 3 seconds during each orbit, requiring perfect timing and accuracy.
Elena synchronized her breathing with the platform's movement pattern, waiting for the optimal moment. When it came, she was ready.
The 10th shot of the engagement punched through the platform's transparent aluminum viewing port and eliminated the commander in a shower of crystalline fragments. The platform immediately began losing altitude, its automated systems engaging as the crew scrambled to maintain control.
It managed a controlled crash landing in the valley below, but the psychological effect on the remaining forces was devastating. Elena had just demonstrated that even their most advanced aerial platforms were vulnerable to her primitive weapon. The surviving Zephyrians formation completely collapsed as soldiers abandoned their positions to seek shelter from an enemy who could apparently strike anywhere, at any time without warning. The interdiction platforms pulled back to higher altitudes, no longer willing to risk close support operations against an undetectable threat. Elena moved to her final prepared position, a natural observation post that offered panoramic views of the entire valley while remaining concealed from aerial observation. From here, she could observe the arrival of the Zephyrian battalion while remaining effectively invisible to their sensors. The battalion arrived with overwhelming force and superiority, hundreds of soldiers deploying in perfect formations backed by advanced technology and coordinated fire support. Their arrival should have marked the end of Elena's harassment campaign, the moment when superior numbers and technology finally prevailed over individual skill and determination. Instead, it marked the beginning of the most important lesson Elena intended to teach. As the fresh troops deployed, Elena selected her 11th target, the battalion commander, easily identifiable by his position and authority patterns. This shot would demonstrate that no amount of reinforcement could protect against an enemy who understood the true nature of warfare. The shot broke clean across nearly 1,500 meters of intervening space, eliminating the battalion commander before he could even begin coordinating his forces. The psychological effect rippled through the entire formation as soldiers realized that their overwhelming numerical superiority meant nothing against an enemy they couldn't locate or understand. Elena's radio crackled with increasing urgency.
Raven 1, you need to begin extraction immediately. We cannot support your position against battalion-strength forces.
Elena smiled as she prepared to move to her extraction route. She had taught the lesson she came to teach. The Zephyrians would remember this engagement for generations, and the story would spread throughout the galaxy. One human sniper, with one rifle, had held off an entire alien battalion while remaining completely undetected. Copy command.
Beginning extraction now. Mission accomplished. As Elena began her withdrawal through the cave system she had prepared for this moment, she could hear the Zephyrians beginning their search operations with renewed desperation.
They had committed massive resources to dealing with a single enemy, and they still had no idea where she was or how she had accomplished what she had done. The lesson was complete. Sometimes the old ways were the best ways, and humans had been perfecting the art of warfare for a very long time indeed. 3 weeks after the engagement, at Kepler 442b, Elena sat in the briefing room of the Colonial Defense Headquarters, watching as intelligence analysts presented their assessment of the battle's aftermath to a room full of military commanders and civilian leaders. The holographic displays showed tactical analyses, casualty reports, and intercepted Zephyrian communications that painted a picture of an alien military force struggling to understand what had happened to them. Colonel Martinez, the Colonial Defense Commander, gestured to the holographic battlefield display. Sergeant Vasquez's engagement has had strategic implications far beyond the immediate tactical victory. Zephyrian forces across this entire sector have modified their operational procedures based on what they learned from this single encounter. Elena listened as the intelligence officer continued the briefing. Intercepted alien communications revealed that the Zephyrians had classified her engagement as a Category 5 anomalous warfare event, the highest possible rating for encounters with unknown tactical doctrines. They had distributed detailed analyses of the engagement to every military unit in their fleet, along with new protocols for dealing with primitive kinetic weapon systems and undetectable human operatives. The battle had become legend among both human and alien forces, but the true measure of its success wasn't found in casualty reports or tactical analyses. It was found in the fundamental change in how an entire alien civilization viewed human military capabilities. Sarah Chen, the colony xenopsychology specialist, provided her assessment. The Zephyrians' response to this engagement indicates a profound shift in their perception of human military doctrine.
They've gone from viewing us as a technologically inferior species using outdated weapons to recognizing us as a legitimate military threat requiring specialized countermeasures. Elena nodded, remembering the final moments of her extraction from the battlefield. She had moved through the cave system she had prepared during initial reconnaissance, following routes that took her 15 kilometers from the engagement area before emerging in territory controlled by human forces. Behind her, the Zephyrians had deployed over 800 soldiers in search operations that continued for 3 days without finding any trace of her presence. The psychological impact on Zephyrian forces had been even more significant than the tactical victory. Intelligence reports indicated that Zephyrian soldiers throughout the sector were displaying increased stress responses when operating in terrain that could conceal human snipers. Their formerly aggressive advance patterns had been replaced by cautious defensive movements that significantly reduced their operational effectiveness. Colonel Martinez turned to Elena.
Sergeant, the intelligence analysis suggests that your engagement has effectively ended Zephyrian operations in this sector. They've withdrawn their forward positions and are requesting massive reinforcements before resuming offensive operations.
Can you explain how a single sniper managed to achieve strategic-level effects against a technologically superior enemy? Elena stood and moved to the holographic display, pointing to the terrain where she had conducted her engagement. Sir, the Zephyrians made a fundamental error in their assessment of human military capabilities. They assumed that, because our weapons appear primitive by their standards, our tactics would be equally primitive. They prepared to fight an enemy who would engage them according to their rules, using their methods, with weapons they understood. She manipulated the display to show the movement patterns she had used during the engagement. Instead, they encountered warfare doctrine that has been refined by humans over thousands of years. Stealth, patience, precision, and psychological warfare applied by an individual operator who could remain undetected by their most advanced sensors. The intelligence officer added supporting data. Intercepted communications indicate that the Zephyrians have completely revised their tactical doctrine for operations on human-controlled worlds. They're now requiring aerial reconnaissance, ground-penetrating sensor sweeps, and coordinated overwatch for any movement in terrain that could conceal human snipers. Elena smiled at this news. The engagement had achieved something far more valuable than eliminating enemy soldiers or disrupting their immediate tactical plans. It had forced an entire alien military organization to fundamentally reconsider their assumptions about human warfare and adapt their operations accordingly. Dr. Chen provided additional context. The Zephyrians have also begun studying human military history, particularly focusing on sniper warfare and guerrilla tactics. They're trying to understand how a species they considered technologically backward could develop such effective asymmetric warfare capabilities. The briefing continued with discussions of broader strategic implications. Other alien species had taken notice of the engagement, and human military doctrine was being studied and analyzed across multiple civilizations. The galaxy was beginning to understand that technological superiority didn't automatically translate to military superiority, and that humans brought unique capabilities to interstellar warfare. Elena's radio had remained active during her extraction, allowing her to monitor Zephyrian communications as their search operations expanded. The aliens had deployed atmospheric interdiction platforms, ground-penetrating sensors, thermal imaging systems, and electromagnetic scanners in patterns designed to locate any possible hiding place within 50 kilometers of the engagement area. They had found nothing, because Elena had already extracted through routes they couldn't conceive of, using techniques they couldn't detect, following doctrine they couldn't understand. The final intelligence report was the most significant. Zephyrian High Command had issued new regulations requiring specific countermeasures for human sniper operations on any world where human forces were present. These countermeasures included massive resource allocation for sensor networks, dedicated anti-sniper units, and protocols that significantly reduced the efficiency of their standard military operations. Colonel Martinez summarized the strategic impact. Sergeant Vasquez's engagement has forced the Zephyrians to completely revise their operational doctrine for this entire sector. They're now allocating significant resources to counter a threat they previously didn't recognize existed. This represents a strategic victory that extends far beyond the immediate tactical situation.
Elena understood the broader implications.
Her great-grandfather's hunting rifle, modified with human ingenuity and applied with techniques passed down through generations, had taught an entire alien civilization that humans were not to be underestimated. The engagement had established human military credibility across the galaxy and forced potential enemies to reconsider their assumptions about technological superiority. The briefing concluded with discussions of future operations and the need to maintain the psychological advantage Elena's engagement had created. Other human snipers were being trained in similar techniques,
and the colonial defense forces were developing new tactical doctrine based on the lessons learned from the engagement. As the meeting dispersed, Elena remained in the briefing room, looking at the holographic display of the battlefield where she had taught the galaxy about human warfare. The engagement had lasted less than 6 hours, but its effects would resonate throughout interstellar military doctrine for generations. Her father had taught her that sniping wasn't just about hitting targets, it was about achieving effects far beyond what the individual shots could accomplish. Elena had eliminated 11 enemy soldiers and fundamentally changed how an entire alien civilization approached warfare with humans. Colonel Martinez approached her as she studied the display. "Sergeant, there's one more thing. We've received communication from Zephyrian High Command. They're requesting a formal meeting to discuss mutual military understanding and respect protocols for future encounters." Elena nodded, understanding the significance. The Zephyrians weren't just adapting their tactics, they were acknowledging humans as legitimate military equals worthy of formal diplomatic engagement. "Will I be involved in those discussions, sir?" The Zephyrians specifically requested to meet the human who demonstrated superior individual warfare capabilities using traditional kinetic weapons systems.
"I believe that's their way of asking to meet you, Sergeant." Elena smiled. The lesson was complete, but the conversation was just beginning. She had shown the galaxy that humans were formidable warriors, despite their apparently primitive technology. Now she would have the opportunity to explain why. The old ways were sometimes the best ways, and the galaxy was finally ready to learn why humans had spent millennia perfecting the art of putting holes in things from very far away. The great-grandfather's hunting rifle had started a conversation that would shape interstellar relations for generations to come. And Elena Vasquez, third-generation sniper, had fired the opening shot.